So, getting ready to paint the stern drive off of my 85 Bayliner. This is a Volvo Penta 270 stern drive, and I pulled this off to replace the dry bellows and the water intake hose and gasket. And while I had it off, I sanded it up good. I was going to paint it. Coming out to mask things off with tape, get a coat of primer on this, and I noticed this is my U-joint. You can see it got lots of play this way, and the one in the back here has got lots of play this way, but this one, it won't move. So I can barely work it. I gotta put everything on it just to move it a very little bit. So the U-joint's bad. Also, well, you can see that. It's leaking oil. Well, that's gear oil. And you can see some here on top of the U-joint, and it's leaking back in behind there where the U-joint, or where the drive shaft goes into the drive, stern drive, to the upper gear assembly. So check the oil level. It's okay. It's not a serious leak. Can't be too bad of a leak if it's still showing a good level. And not sure if it's because this U-joint's just hanging here and it's not sealing up, putting pressure on one of the rings inside. I don't know. But at any rate, the U-joint needs replaced, so it's gonna have to come off. And I'm not sure how any of this works, but I'm about to find out, and I'll let you know. Alright, so a little bit of progress here on this U-joint. There are retaining rings right on the edge of the joint. So right here, right there, and I know this is going to be hard for y'all to see, but that Zerk is in my way. If you look back in here, right now I have that screwdriver. It is under that ring, and I've already pried it up about 1/4 of an inch. Now on that snap ring or retaining ring, whatever you want to call it, there is room to squeeze a small screwdriver under the retaining ring and then pry up. So that's how those retaining rings come off. And I try to get you a better shot of what that ring looks like. So you know, on most U-joints that I've worked on, there's a snap ring, and it's out here on the outside, and there's a groove cut in the yoke of the joint, and you put the cap in over top of the U-joint, and you press it down in there far enough that you can squeeze that snap ring into that groove, and that's what holds it in. This is something new to me, but there you can see how that ring's been pried up. So I'm going to go ahead and take this one off and take the one off on the other side and see if I can't get this apart. Alright, so this U-joint and this drive shaft on this 270 stern drive. Now, I thought that once I took this cover off, I could slide what is, I would call the drive shaft, right out of this upper limit or upper unit. But looking at the schematics, it looks like there is a retaining ring back here that's holding this shaft in. And so in order to get both U-joints off the stern drive, you have to take the entire upper unit off the stern drive. And to do that, according to the manual, is quite the task. So I didn't feel like doing that. And you know, typically a U-joint with enough heat and enough hammering, they eventually come apart. I didn't want to pound on this one with it in the unit because I didn't want to destroy anything back behind it. So I did the typical C-clamp with a large socket and tightened it down as best I could. I got about 300 foot-pounds on it, and the clamp flew off. Luckily I was wearing safety glasses. It hit me in the eye, busted my eyebrow pretty good, so that wasn't going to work. I recommend you do not do that. And the reason that wouldn't work is you couldn't get that socket to lay flat on either side of the caps of that U-joint, so it's on an angle. So when you get so much tension on it, it's going to fly off. So I had to redneck it up, and I got my slide hammer that I purchased from Harbor Freight a few years ago. Got the 2-fingered gear puller, and then I've got a socket that's smaller than the cap on the U-joint. Tighten that down and put a lot of torque on it, and finally this cap is starting to come out the other side. So I'm not having to beat on it. I am having to put a lot of tension on it, so I still hope I'm not doing anything to destroy anything inside that stern drive, but it looks like I'm finally going to get this U-joint apart. But any of you ever tried to replace these U-joints without removing it from the stern drive, this may be the way you need to go. I'll check in with you later. Well, it's off. It's a lot of work. There's the U-joint itself, one of the caps. Here's the yoke. I soaked it in gasoline to get the grease off because the grease had a lot of rust on it, so I'll clean that up and re-grease it when I put it back on. New U-joint is ordered. Hasn't arrived yet. Was pretty expensive as far as U-joints go. For one, it was $35 plus $15 shipping. That's pretty steep. And that's for my boats. That's the cheapest place I could find it. It's supposed to be 2 days shipping, but that was 4 days ago. So, not sure when it's going to get here. So in the meantime, I got grease all over this thing while I was trying to get the U-joint off. So now I'm going to have to clean it all up again, and I'll either, the new U-joint will come and I'll put it in, or I'll go ahead and mask this off and try to get it painted while I'm waiting. But that's where we're at so far. When that new U-joint comes in, I'll make sure to do a quick video on the install. I don't think it'll be too bad. But this whole part, both U-joints and the yokes and the shafts, are selling on eBay for like $600. And just this piece was like $200 on eBay. So, not sure what the deal is with that. I never have guessed it would have been that expensive, but just in case you have to replace the whole thing, it's going to cost you. But at the price of that, you'd almost be worth buying a junk boat and pulling with the same stern drive and just pulling it off for the parts. Junking the boat. But that's where we're at. Alright, I got this stern drive painted and getting ready to put the new U-joint on. It's the new U-joint. Associated hardware. There are two grease fittings in this package. One is straight and one has a 90-degree elbow. I'll use the 90-degree. That's the one that's used here on this other U-joint, and that looks like it's there to make it a lot easier to get in there with the grease gun on that Zerk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some fine grit sandpaper and clean these out real good, and then I'll install this U-joint on this piece first, and then I'll install it to the shaft second. So let's get started. Okay, so the grease Zerk is installed, and then what you want to do is remove two of these caps, and you want to be very careful. The unit does come pre-greased, or the U-joint, and as you can see, there are maybe, I don't know, 100 very small needle bearings on the inside of each cap. So you don't want to disturb those, and you certainly don't want to lose them. So you pull those off gently, and you insert your U-joint like so, and then you carefully put the two caps on the end, and then you might have to use a little bit of force depending on how snug that fit is. You have to get them in far enough to get one of these rings to seat behind this yoke here and in this groove in the U-joint. So hopefully I can do this by hand. We'll find out. As far as the grease fitting, I tighten that to finger tight and then about 3/4 of a turn. You want to be careful with that. Last thing you want to do is strip that out or break it off. That'll ruin your brand new U-joint. So I don't think it has to be extremely tight, just tight enough to form a decent seal to force grease into that joint periodically when it needs greased. So I'll come back later. Well, so what is pretty much standard look for me, those end caps would barely seat themselves before I couldn't move them any further. So as you can see, I have a C-clamp on each end, and I just start tightening this clamp up and slowly working each of those caps in until they're seated fully. Looks like one's going in pretty good, the other one not so much. So I'll keep you posted. Alright, so I got this U-joint on. Wasn't too hateful. It did take a lot of elbow grease to get both caps seated down to where they needed to be in order to get the snap rings in those grooves. But it's in. So now next is this yoke here, and basically same concept. Take the caps off, put the yoke on, put the caps in the yoke of this little mini shaft here, and then press the caps in until you can get your snap rings in. Hopefully this one goes a little smoother, a little bit easier than those two. We'll find out. Alright, there it is. New U-joint installed. Moves freely. A little stiff up and down, but that'll work out. And it needs greased. I mean, it comes greased, but I'm gonna squirt some grease in there. It'll help even out those end caps, take some of the pressure off. But stern drive's ready to go back on the boat. So next up is stern drive installation.